referred to as a cyborg who lives on our world in exile. She came to Atlas age 12, you see, and now, nearly 18, she outgrew her implants. Of course, this is the official explanation. I have it on good authority she was involved in that hullabaloo in England a year ago. Apparently, some of those transhuman cultists took a liking to her. Anyway, she is in this city for an operation. However, instead, she decided to go down the tunnels with the natives. Treasure hunting, I suppose. Would she survive Hades' halls? We hope she doesn't waste any more time meeting the founder. I have it from good sources. The association has big plans for her. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is sponsored off Radio Retrofuture, and today with me I have not one but two guests who will join us to talk about their project Skies on Fire, which was recently funded successfully on Kickstarter. And if I'm correct, you're still working on the fulfillment at the moment, isn't that right?
That is correct.
All right. Yeah, I guess I'll have to introduce you to the audience. So yes, with me are Vince and Ray. Vince, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hey guys, yeah, sure. My name is Vince, and I am a comic book creator, writer, along with my partner Ray. We run a company called Mythopia, and we together developed this series called Skies of Fire that is all about airships and dueling in its own unique universe.
All right. And you have anything to add to that, Ray?
No, that's pretty much it. So Skies of Fire is our first comic series that we started publishing back in 2014, and we have subsequently done a couple of other comics, and we've moved into tabletop role-playing games and other mediums as well.
Nice. All right, awesome. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. I think I encountered your project through Facebook ads. Um, so I guess I'm gonna have to do that for my next one as well. And it's funny because you seem to have done a path that I'm on right now. Accidentally also moved kind of into comics from books. And yeah, I am talking with somebody about a potential role playing game. So I'm really honored to be in your presence right now because I really admire what you managed to achieve. And you've got quite an audience, if I saw the Kickstarter correctly. So yeah, and you also seem like I'm listening to the audio commentaries that you made about your project. And we also have very similar uh, philosophies, I guess. Um, so I'd love to pick your brains about that as well at some point. But let's start with yeah, how did you come together and how did this develop? Like what was the driving force? Who wants to start?
Yeah, sure, I could pick that up. Yeah, well, Skies of Fire has been kind of my passion project since I want to say the first time I've written down the title was in 2008. And I was in university at the time. That's where I actually met Ray. We went to university together at New York University. And I was just really enamored by airships and that technology from Studio Ghibli and other kind of pop cultural references. So I that was my kind of vision. We went to film school, so I wanted to make an airship movie. Um, and the first place I guess I started doing my research and my development was literally in the school library. Back then in NYU, you could take out a couple of books, and there used to be a photocopy machine there where there was free printing. And I basically printed, I think it was like 2 to 3,000 pages of reference material. I was just literally standing there, photocopying book after book. And then I think it was like a week or two later, they stopped free printing and they started charging people. So sorry, NYU people who are there and now have to pay for printing, but that was me.
All right. Ray, how did this go? Some guy comes to you like, I want to make something about airships, and you were like, yes, let's do it.
Well, it was more like Vince would constantly bring it up whenever we were on set. Vince was a very unique individual amongst a cadre of unique individuals that comprise film school. So he was in we ran in the same circles, which in film school means that we basically crew together all the time on our friends' projects. And Vince, oftentimes during our sets, would bring up his brilliant idea of an airship, and he would kind of bring it up to anybody who would listen at the time. So everybody heard the pitch for Skies of Fire while we were in film school. He would always go, "Hey, want to hear my airship story? In my airship story, we're going to have this shot over here, and this is going to happen. And did you know this about airships?" And this would happen in the early mornings while we were loading it. It would certainly happen on sets where Vince was a gaffer. Quite often, he was a grip and gaffer on a lot of different films, and it would certainly happen. I remember distinctly it happening during loadouts on cold winter New York days at 2 a.m. driving around a 13-passenger van filled with equipment, finding somewhere to park it. We would hear about the pitch to Skies of Fire pretty frequently.
Yeah.
So yeah, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's just funny to me how familiar it all sounds. I've done a lot. I am not a professional creative, but I've done a lot of volunteer work for video shit, video stuff, and the movies and stuff like that. And yeah, it all sounds so familiar, while you're at set with all these strangers who are trying to pitch your product, your passion, and so it's just wonderful to hear those kind of experience come back at me. But yeah, so when came like the moment, like, let's do it? What was the engine behind that?
Well, basically after university, what happened was, because I'm not American, I had just like, I think I did a year after graduating, just doing odd jobs and things like that in New York. And then I moved back to Italy for a couple of months. And from there, I moved to London. And over that time, Ray and I were kind of, communicating online, and we still wanted to like be part of the film industry. And I think part of our goal was to write a script and sell it and shop it off. And so what we were doing was we were sending each other scripts as a way to get feedback and like kind of confirm our direction as writers and whatnot. And I remember distinctly, I was working on the Skies of Fire script, but I did not show it to him until literally the first day I was in London. For whatever reason, moving to London was kind of like the trigger point, where it was like I was in this new place. I've never been living in London before, and I kind of was just like, all right, I'm in this rented space. First thing I'm going to logically do is finish the script. And so I finished the first draft Skies of Fire then and there, and sent it over. And then I think a couple of days later, Ray came back and was like, "Oh, this is really interesting. Like, do you mind if I collab and write on the script?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so that was a couple of months going back and forth, writing on the script and really kind of getting it to where we wanted it to be. And we were thinking about shopping it around and getting someone to look at it and make it into a film, but we didn't get any luck on that. And I think one day out of the blue, I don't know, Ray, you can kind of chime in on this one, but Ray kind of just mentioned like, oh, let's just make a comic. It's more cost effective, and Kickstarter was there at the time, and that could be a really good option.
Well, what year is this?
2013, 2012.
2013, yeah.
So that's like the early years of Kickstarter.
Yes, yeah. 2012 was when we started working on the script together. When Vince sent me the script, I was in Taiwan. I remember that. So I was living in Taipei at the time. And like Vince, I had spent a year in New York after graduating, doing odd jobs, moving furniture, crewing for $45 a day, stuff like that. And then I worked in Hollywood for another 7 to 8 months in a producer's office, and did not like that. It was a very bad experience, and decided to go study abroad for a little bit. So I was in Taiwan at the time, and we wrote, I don't know, I want to say over 10 drafts over the course of like 4 or 5 months or something like that, from roughly May of 2012 to about January of 2013, I want to say. I remember it was the winter holiday. It was right around Christmas of 2012 when we finished like a draft that we were both pretty happy with. Something around there. I remember being on the road. I was on a road trip up and down the west coast of the United States at the time. And the idea to turn it into a comic book, I'm not really sure where that came from, to be quite honest. I know that I had that idea, and I think I had that idea because comics was always something that I enjoyed as a kid growing up. It was something that I was very enthusiastic about, even into my early adult years in college. So that was sort of always in the back of my mind, and I thought that it would be a really good project for that, given the scope of it, given the genre, given the story, given all these things that we had planned for it. I thought that making it into a comic book would make sense first. And I remember that our plan actually was not, at least my plan was, when beginning to look into it, was not necessarily to crowdfund it, but to pitch it to, say, an Image Comics or a Dark Horse or some sort of independent publisher, as was the norm back then. But because we were in film school, we knew of Kickstarter ever since its launch. It launched back in 2009, I believe, or 2008. And we were juniors in film school at the time. So many of our peers fundraised their student films on Kickstarter. So we were very early adapters of that platform. And I had always kept an eye on it. I noticed that there was a comic section, I think, and I started doing some research, started backing some projects, and I thought, this has some potential. Looks like this might have a moment, and kind of pitched the idea to Vince, and he was like, okay, yeah, sure, let's go for it. And so we did.
All right. And what was the I have this theory that I recently pitched on my channel, that one of the problems that steampunk isn't going mainstream. Well, let's start with the question, like, what genre did you define your work as at the time?
Historical fantasy.
Yeah, historical fantasy. I'm not sure. I think that's a tough one, because I would say it's in the genre of diesel punk. But I remember when we were kind of shopping it at Comic Cons when we were in New York, and we were like, oh, this is a steampunk adventure series, and someone corrected us there and was like, "No, it's not. It's a diesel punk series." And we were like, "Oh, okay." Um, in all honesty, we I think for me personally, I like to think of it as trying to break the mold of being genre specific. I'm trying, I want to see this series as something apart from that. And one thing that really was inspiring for me about that was back in college. I think this was Battlestar Galactica, right? The reimagined series.
Yeah,
It
it was
was
about that
getting quite
time.
hot, and yeah, and I loved it to bits. I think that series is just such a spectacular series. And the Bible, the show Bible, was circulating around NYU students. It was something that, like, you'd be like, "Oh, dude, you like Battlestar Galactica? Check this out. This is the story Bible." And when you read the story Bible of Battlestar Galactica, like, one of the first lines that is written in there is, "This is not a sci-fi show," uh, which is quite a, contradictory kind of concept if
No,
you
but
think
I
about it,
get
because
it.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. It's I think it's something about more like just, of course, bottom line is it is
Yeah, it's a
sci-fi,
war
but
story when you
it's a war story, yes. It's about shifting perspective, right? It's about, it's what The Walking Dead do when they call zombies walkers instead of zombies. They kind of want to shift you away from a certain kind of
from the
perception,
tropes, I guess.
from the tropes, exactly. So, that was something that really clung on to me, and whenever I write, I try to write it as organically as possible, or, catering to what I see in the world, as opposed to, say, through tropes.
Mm-hmm. Ray, what was your how did you consider your role in this whole process?
Well, Vince and I had a lot of common touchstones in which we realized after meeting each other. We were definitely among the dorkiest, nerdiest people in film school, I would say.
That's true.
We bonded over a love of Battlestar Galactica, which, was, even though we were in film school, it wasn't like universally loved at our film school. It was like a couple of geeks, right? Like we really were the geeks of the school. A lot of people were geeking out about Tarantino and Scorsese, and we were talking about Ronald D. Moore and Peter Jackson and Lord of the Rings and things like that. So Battlestar Galactica was a huge touchstone, and so for me in the rewrites at least, we looked at I thought about Master and Commander. I thought about Star Trek had come out. The reboot of Star Trek had come out in 2010 when we were seniors, I believe. So that was very fresh on my mind, especially in thinking about how to handle an ensemble cast, because we have 6, 7 characters in Skies of Fire, each with their own unique arc, which is just quite challenging to juggle. So I really thought my role was um, to give some dynamism, to think about things thematically. I think Vince is very visually oriented. He was a DP, grip gaffer. He knows how to frame things, and he knows how to cinematically visually tell a story. And I think where I come in is I'm a bit more of the kind of thematic characterization structure. How do we entangle the internal with the external with the philosophical? Like, those are the type of things that I really push for in our writing, basically. So that's sort of where I come in.
All right, all right. And the reason why I asked you about the genre thing, like, I have this theory that one of the big problems, I got this question, I saw it various times where people ask, like, why doesn't, steampunk, dieselpunk get more recognition? And I think that one of the big issues is that there is not a clear vision for the genre, or well, what it would do. And I think that, and this is something that comes back in your commentary track that you did for the Kickstarter stretch goal, I think it was. And then and the thing, and this is also something I keep hammering on in my own videos regarding steampunk, and why I think the distinction people make between dieselpunk and steampunk is so arbitrary, is that it's mostly a mixture of pop culture and history. And I guess this is a good moment to bring in Pavel, I think his name is, your illustrator, or one of the illustrators, I should say. Tell us, who of you can tell us a little bit more about him and your working relationship with him, because I think that's important here.
Sure. Yeah. No, Pablo Pepino. He's the artist who did all the line work and all the inking for the entire series from 1 to 8. He's this spectacular artist who really has a vision and a drive to every panel that he creates, and I think that's something that really drew us to him. And he brings, you're always looking for someone who kind of fits into what you're trying to do as a piece of the jigsaw, someone who isn't just there to do a job but is there to contribute as well. So there's a lot of contributions that he provided us for the series as well. Little elements that we go, wow, that is amazing. Let's use that. Let's draw that out and make it part of the series. So our relationship is one of collaborating, and I think that was such a wholesome thing to experience, because it was. I think at the end of the day, it makes the series stronger, because it's not just a singular voice. It's many of us coming together and really bringing it to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. So to finally get to my point about the genre stuff, is that one, and maybe you can tell me because you actually pitched it as a film originally, is that for a lot of people it's very hard to explain dieselpunk, steampunk as a thing. But I think what I also suspect, and I hope you can answer this for me, is that a lot of companies don't know how to market it because it's such a strange thing. Is that something that you encountered?
Well, we have pretty much made the decision to go independent with Skies of Fire since its inception. So we didn't quite pitch it to anybody, I would say, other than our audience, other than our backers, and other people at shows that have picked us up over the years. But to your point about steampunk and dieselpunk, I think that, well, a couple of things. I think if you look historically, I think you're right in that steampunk is hard to generalize because there is no capstone, there is no reference point to what steampunk is as a genre, versus in fantasy you can look to.
It doesn't have like
a Lord of the Rings,
like Cyberpunk has. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have a Blade Runner, it doesn't have a Lord of the Rings, it doesn't have a Star Trek, Star Wars, or even a Dune, right? There's the genre itself is more of an aesthetic genre, right? It's a combination of the way things look and sort of like this historical kind of hearkening, at least in my opinion. But I do think that, and two things. Number one is you do see attempts at steampunk over the years, not necessarily called steampunk, but every major attempt at steampunk has failed, right? In terms of the box office or whatnot, cinematically. Immortal Engines is the last one that I can really think of, and I thought, hey, maybe if this succeeds, steampunk is going to have a moment where there will be a bigger palette for steampunk things, but no, it didn't do very well. Wild Wild West, right? The old Will Smith movie also did not do very well. So I think that is the reason why steampunk hasn't necessarily succeeded, because every time that there is a potential tentpole, a potential movie that could act as a reference point for the genre, when we first started making Skies of Fire in 2013, 2014, it seemed like steampunk was going to be a rising genre. It might be
Yeah,
the next big
2012.
thing,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and I think something happened around the turn of the decade where all of a sudden, instead of being a potentially huge genre, it became well, whatever happened to steampunk, or why hasn't it taken off in the way? But I also do think that you can see elements of steampunk in a lot of places that would traditionally be called fantasy or other genres. For instance, Arcane, right? The League of Legends show
Yeah,
Arcane
yeah,
is
yeah.
heavily steampunk. And I would argue that that might be the most successful steampunk story, narrative, franchise, intellectual property of all time up to now. What else? There's a couple of, like, Legend of
Well, I
Korra, for
mean, in
instance,
gaming, it's
had
very big. But yeah, the thing with the retrofuturism, this is also why for me, made it kind of a mission to kind of write a history for steampunk and retrofuturism. But for me, it will include things like Western and Weird West. That's, by the way, what Wild Wild West is. It's Weird West.
right.
And everyone forgotten about Weird West. Now it's making a comeback in gaming. And
Yeah.
oh, hello, Gears. But I think that one is that there is not a clear vision for steampunk, and that's kind of like also the reason why I created my own series, the Association of Ishtar. And second, there's not like there are a number of successful steampunk related projects, especially in comics, but there's no unlike cyberpunk, there was all these writers, they knew each other. I'm not a major William Gibson fan, but he knew how to sell himself. He knew how to sell his work. And that's, as far as I can tell, the biggest claim to fame of all those writers, that they came up with all these terms for their work. And and there's no one trying to connect things like Skies of Fire or Lady Mechanica or all these, or the Boston Metaphysical Society into like a grand narrative that kind of like makes up the genre, which is by the way defined as a collection of stories with similar themes and narratives. But there's no attempt to connect those in a timeline and say, well, this is the canon of steampunk, so to say. But it also makes it interesting in a way, because you never know what you're gonna get. But for an audience, they kind of want to know what you're gonna get, and I think that makes it very hard to, because like you said, you didn't want to connect your series with a particular genre, and well, I mean, it's also very hard with the Association of Ishtar. Like the first and the second book are very different settings, like the themes, and I think this is something that I really want to define. For me, steampunk is more about themes that you can find in Western as well, and yeah, of course you cannot come to that with your audience. It would be far too complicated. But so yeah, well, you have any thoughts on that? On ideas on how can we like make a greater canon of work?
Well, I don't know.
Is it possible?
It's a challenging concept. I don't think it's impossible. I think if you do find the right people to bring it together, there might be a chance. But I mean, from my experience, there is, this fragmentation. There's people seem to, even writers and creators seem to enjoy it in a way, because I remember coming across a creator who was doing a lot of steampunk work. They were actually 15, 16 years into it. And they do a lot of Kickstarters. I don't remember the name now, but when they kind of was giving me the sales pitch at a convention, they were like, this isn't steampunk, this is Gaslamp. So for them, like they wanted to stay away from the steampunk identity. Um, I never asked them
Katja
why,
Foglio. The Foglios, perhaps?
but yeah, I think that
Yeah,
might be
they.
them.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
that's. Yeah, can I? Should I explain the difference to you?
yeah. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay. So, and I think they're right. But they are, by the way, the inventors of Gaslamp. But I think that's because they got it, and because, like I said,
Mm-hmm.
steampunk is heavily involved in themes, and you know, there are you can set steampunk stories in fantasy settings, but they are really about that conflict between old and new, progress versus tradition. And a Gaslamp is mostly fantasy with a steampunk skin. And of course, there
Okay.
are like very much tropes that it really are the visual tropes and the quirkiness of like old
Mm-hmm.
science fiction. So it's there. But when it comes to like what for me makes steampunk is really those themes, and that's why I also mentioned Western so often. Actually, is the themes of progress versus tradition, and the characters struggling with the concept and societies in flux. Whereas Gaslamp Fantasy is just well, it's literally and steampunk is high concept, whereas Gaslamp is low concept. So it's really traditional fantasy, really in many regards, and that's also the problem and why Mortal Engines failed is because it presents itself as a high concept setting. Oh, it's going to be about cities, fighting each other, but really it's a low concept story, and there are some moving cities in the background. And that's what I mean with people don't have a clear vision for steampunk because I got a lot of people because we also have like threads where people can show their writing and ask for feedback and stuff, and much of it is just fantasy with a steampunk skin.
Right.
And
Right.
that's the big difference between, and that's why she's so eminent. Like, yeah, we don't do steampunk, and I think she's right, because her
Mm-hmm.
work is really fantasy with all the tropes of that. Whereas steampunk is very hard to write. It's around for a long time, but most people don't know it, and that's why people often confuse so much fantasy with steampunk. That's that lack of vision that I'm talking about. Um, and Lloyd Kaufman, who's Lloyd Kaufman again? I recognize the name, but I forgot who he is. Anyway, Trippy Soul liked to geek about him when he was in film school. Could you enlighten us on who he was, Trippy Soul? Um, yeah, but I hope that clarified something. I'm not even sure why I even wanted to bring that up, but
No, it
oh,
definitely did. I mean, it shows you how many different kind of like avenues you can go for within this kind of like umbrella of genres. So that might be the one of the challenging aspects of trying to create a unified
mm-hmm,
front when it comes to this kind of material.
mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's difficult because when it comes to steampunks or fans of steampunk, I will rather say, is that if they enjoy the sci-fi steampunk, they'll probably like the fantasy Gaslamp, you know, because there's overlap. So from that perspective, it might not matter that much. Um, but for me, this is a lot of feedback I also get from my readers, is that there is a sense of groundedness to it. That's and with Gaslamp, well, it's more like D&D with your friends. So that's I think that's a very important difference. Ray, do you have anything to bring in on this topic before we move to something else?
Um, Steampunk, I will say from our experience is mixed when it comes to interacting with the steampunk community as at large. I don't think we've ever specifically marketed towards steampunk fans. I actually, whenever I see a steampunk cosplayer pass by our booth or something like that, I think it's 50-50 because I don't think that sometimes I feel like there's that what you described where you are initially, it might seem like it would be a good match and that they would enjoy it if they were in a particular costume, but the people who resonate with the aesthetic enough to cosplay as it are very particular sometimes about what is and what isn't. And
Yeah.
Our work is like Vince said in his first anecdote, it's, you know, hey, it's not steampunk, it's diesel punk, right? Someone who is into the genre. And we're not really I guess we are because we've been working on this for like 10 years or so, but like we don't really, you know, we don't really identify ourselves as part of the steampunk community either. I mean, I'm friends, we're good friends with Madeline Holly Roseling, the creator of Boston Metaphysical, and
Yep.
we've interacted with members of the steampunk community who have helped us in various ways in creating models for us and all sorts of things like that. But I would say that the steampunk community hasn't decided what steampunk is. There is no, like you said, no unified vision of what it is. So whenever I see someone dressed in steampunk, to be honest, there is a reaction where I'm like, I rather just pitch to somebody, to people not dressed up, because I think that
Yeah, I know what you
people
mean.
who are
Yeah,
dressed
me
up
too.
in steampunk will have an opinion about it. You know what I mean? And I just would not rather deal with that. You know, I rather just pitch it as the story as what it is, as opposed to somebody who is going to say what it is or define what it is based off of what it isn't, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I understand it completely. And like I said, when I talk about steampunk, I can mean one of three things, which can either be an aesthetic, a genre, or, you know, the people who dress up, you know, the community. And they are very three different things. So, you know, we as creators, we talk to each other a lot, but that's because we are creators. Whereas, yeah, the people in the costumes, yeah, they don't really care about the creators. And, you know, it's I found it out the hard way, and yeah, it's sad but true. They have very different interests, and yeah. But something else then, because you also wanted to talk about the airships. Now you can see it, but I have one on screen right now. And it's something that I'm struggling with because, you know, I too want my world to be grounded. So, and one of the things that I have problems with, especially when it comes to like a lot of outlandish vehicle designs in general. It's like, you know, what is it supposed to be? You know, and in what situation are they supposed to use this? And, you know, especially also with the big airships, you know, it's nice up to the flintlock era, you know, where they can hit you from the ground up. But after that, you know, when the 88 millimeter cannons come in, how did you deal with that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you know, part of doing the airships and the technology, one thing that really fascinates me a lot is like that interwar period and World War II as well, like technology, the development of everything. Let's say from planes to tanks to even airships. And one thing that you learn from these developments is that a lot of it is literally trial and error. You know, there's a lot of theorizing, there's a lot of development on the board, but then, you know, you send the airship off to do their mission, and then they come back and they go, hey, you know, this is not a very good technology, and then they get that feedback and they help continue the future iterations. For me, it was just research, just head down, understand kind of why the technology developed and grew the way it did in our world. And there's a lot of interesting things you can pick up from the history of the airship technology, or Zeppelins specifically, where it was developed, in Germany, and the first airship hangar was on Lake Constance, and it was a floating hangar in the middle of the lake. And great story was that even though it was this entire project was developed by a count who you'd think would be relatively rich, land prices were so exorbitant that it was actually cheaper to create a floating hangar to float it out into the middle of the lake, and just get his research done there and building. So there are all these little golden nuggets you get from like history itself when you do the research, and you go, oh, that's really cool. How do I implement that, and how do I do that? In regards to like the technology itself, a lot of the airships were actually aided by the help of an amazing artist named Alexandre Boucourt, who kind of goes in the same wheelhouse as we do, where he's just really fascinated with all these technologies. In fact, I think I invited him a few years ago to a trip over to London to see some tanks in a tank museum, which he gladly accepted, and we went to see the Tiger tank drive around and things like that. But he's very much a encyclopedia of these kinds of technologies, and when it came to development, we would be kind of shooting each other questions and ideas and being like, okay, well, like, what turrets would be appropriate for these ships, and kind of what is the military philosophy behind it, because a lot of that will infer what the design should look like, based off of national, cultural, and military philosophies and strategies. So he's been quite a big asset to the development.
All right. And could you explain a little bit more, like how are they powered? How do they keep in the air?
Sure. I think so. Like it's all they all have engines, dieselpunk, I guess. There is helium and hydrogen in the world, but I guess the one thing that we reached out on was to create a new novel element that was lighter, to make it a little bit more believable that these ships could actually fly with all the weight, and we called it Cavorium, a nod to some which story has it? Cavorite, which is H.G. Wells, right?
That's possible. Yeah,
I might be
rings a
mistaken.
bell,
But yeah, so it was a nod to that, where there he had a novel kind of lighter than air element that could help make vehicles fly, and so those are the basic kind of foundations. And then moving into like the design itself, we looked into a lot of like interwar ship technology, as well as World War One and Two ship technology, seeing what like turrets were available and why these turrets were being used. For example, some turrets on World War II vessels were designed so that if the ship capsized, the turrets would fall out. So that way, the buoyancy will assist in riding it back up, and you lose a bunch of guns, but at the same time, you have the chance of saving the ship. So that element was really cool and interesting, and it was like, okay, how do we integrate that into the airship designs themselves? Because clearly that seems to be a beneficial element in their design. So it goes down to kind of case by case basis, where you're like looking at how to develop the vessel and why you develop the vessel, and then you use kind of case studies of real life technology of the time to kind of support that. So I think at a certain point, going deep into the research, I discovered that there was an airship made with I think an aluminum hull. So it was completely enshrouded in aluminum, which it's like, okay, that's pretty insane. It's like fully metal on the outside. And it flew and it worked, but I think it was one of those experiments where in the end, analysts concluded that it was not very cost effective. But the fact that it existed allowed us to kind of support certain things that we were claiming in our world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also try to like incorporate like also some newer technology, some 20th century technologies into it. But during the commentary, you also mentioned, being inspired by Tintin and comics like that. Did you also take some ideas from that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, Tintin is my favorite comic by far and large. It was the thing that my parents basically like. If I got good grades, I would get a Tintin comic. So
Oh.
I've been reading them for years. Um, yeah, what I loved about Tintin comics was the kind of adventurous aspect of all the books where each book would take place in a specific place, another world, like another country, and then you get to meet, and interact, and there's this whole like cultural discovery. Of course, critics nowadays would say a lot of those things were not exactly accurate or appropriate. In fact, because I was living in Dubai at the time, when we would buy copies of Tintin in Dubai, and some of the copies where he goes to like Arabic countries like Egypt or in the Arabias, there would be certain lines in the comic where they would have added a little sticker with an asterisk on it, and then a second sticker at the bottom, and then it would say like, oh, according to our culture, you shouldn't be doing this. This comic is inaccurate here. And they would go through, they would go through the entire comic and do that to like specific moments where they believe is culturally unfair. But nonetheless, like I think if you understand that and you go in and you kind of like frame the story at the time it was written, I mean, it's just such a marvelous experience. And same Hergé, I think, was a big fan of automobiles and aviation itself.
Oh yeah.
I actually have, yeah, I have two copies of books that he's written. Well, not he's written, but they're drawn with pictures of World War II planes and like with Tintin-esque characters next to them. And then the book kind of goes through each plane, like, the design, the technology and all that. So definitely technologically in the same headspace where he's just fascinated by these, machines.
Oh yeah, Miyazaki was also someone like that. I also just sent you a picture from our upcoming comic that we are working on. I think you'll like it. I think you'll recognize it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So yeah, that's
Oh, I love it.
what
Yeah.
we are currently working on as well. So yeah, that's why I mentioned the similarities between what we're doing. All right. So you said you had about an hour, so we're entering the last 15 minutes. Is there something you want to talk about? Whatever you want. Something you have not delved into.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think in regards to airships, like I'm just a big fan of them to the point where um, I think starting this series is kind of my secret way of trying to help get airships back into the world. And my dream would be to kind of own an airship myself one day. But I think the technology is slowly kind of coming back.
Yeah.
There's definitely good utility for it. If you think of like, its ability to land and take off, kind of like a helicopter, but and I remember listening to there's a documentary made about this trip around the world with one of the Zeppelins, and it was a documentary that was positioned according to the writing of one of the journalists who was on board, and it was one of the first female journalists, and just the things she writes about, like kind of this experience where it almost sounds like it's, you know, it's revealing in a way that is to another level, right? Like you reach this kind of nirvana, and she talks about how like it's so quiet because the engines are far back from the gondola, and it feels like you're just floating on thin air. Yeah. So that's I hope that's an experience I will get to experience in my lifetime. So
I'm
yeah, if
slightly reminded of, and this was an actual product that was promoted by a magazine called Popular Mechanics. I really want to do a stream on that sometime, just going through the Popular Mechanics magazines, which are very interesting, also as a time capsule. But it was a company who made helicopter campers. So
wow.
yeah, I forgot which helicopter it was, but they had like two
Mhm.
models, a small one and a big one, so to speak. And
Mhm.
it was literally just a helicopter. You could land it somewhere, put out stuff like a camper, like it had the interior of a camper, and it's yeah, and people bought it too. There were people who bought it. It was more of a PR stunt, but yeah, you know,
Oh, that's
just
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah, no,
just
definitely.
I forgot its name. It had like a very like 70s esque name. Um, I don't know, the flying camper or something like that. I don't know, or the flying home. I don't know. But yeah, that's a thing that existed, and then somebody made like a whole documentary on it on YouTube. If you're interested in the history, but I will have to look it up. But yeah, it existed. Um, any other stuff you wanted to mention? You're currently working on a fulfillment. What future projects do you have in mind?
Yeah, we actually have a Kickstarter that we're launching on Tuesday for our other comic series, Glow. So I'll drop a link into our chat and maybe you can share it. But we're excited to be bringing back this series, which is a little bit different. It's not quite as steampunky. It's a little bit more techno fantasy. That is on our immediate horizon right at the moment, but we are also working on fulfillment of Skies of Fire, like we mentioned. So that's happening behind the scenes. We're also working on fulfillment of another project called CBR plus PNK, which is a stripped down brochure based RPG rule set that is very fun and should be very very cool. We just actually took a meeting about that about fulfillment stuff, and we are also working on the expansion to the Wild Sea, which is our tabletop role playing game. It's weird fantasy, which is another related genre. China Mavel, that type of stuff. So it's a weird fantasy game set in a world overrun by trees in which you play as cactus folk, fungoids, humanoids, spider hive minds, and other stranger things. So that's fun. We're working on promoting the community for that. And we have a couple of other projects that are unannounced that we should be announcing soon. So we have a lot of stuff cooking in the background. We are going through a major phase of expansion right now in terms of what we do, and yeah, it's been very very exciting. It's been challenging trying to figure out what we want to do creatively as well as a venture, as a partnership together, managing both the creative and the business side of things while also fulfilling our desires or remembering why we got into this and why we decided to pursue creative careers in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Vince moved to back home to Italy recently, so it's been really exciting having him full time as well. We were working kind of part time on this stuff before, so we're both kind of full time, going full blow on that now.
Congrats.
And yeah. What else? Working on a rebrand. That's going on behind the scenes. There's a million things cooking right now at any given time, and it seems like it seems like it's just gonna be like that going forward, which is both exciting and a little bit terrifying. So
Can imagine. Yeah. I might have a development like this that coming this year. So really looking forward that for my own stuff. Speaking of which, for those who have not yet followed us on Kickstarter, please do so. Link should be in the description. Bound for the Styx is coming. If you like this guy stuff, you'll probably enjoy that as well. And for those who are watching us on screen, I currently also have the concept art for our new miniature that's going to be part of our upcoming campaign. We have 3 new books, and especially very enthusiastic about the supplements. And yes, we also have stuff by other authors as well. So you have that to look forward to as well, and some surprise stuff that I'm gonna be working on. But yeah, for me this month I have to work hard to finish an audiobook. So, but then everything should be done. Discussed distribution yesterday, so that should be arranged. So yeah, everything is on track, but enough to do. All right. I always like to end my episodes with some words of wisdom of our guests. Do you have something to share with the world? Let's start with Ray this time.
Sure. Words of wisdom. Yeah. Try to finish things. Like try to finish things. That's the hardest part.
Oh yeah.
Finish them even if it's bad, right? Especially if it's bad, if it's not going the way you want, you especially want to finish things in those scenarios, because you can't really make something better unless it's finished first. So the lesson I have to remind myself of constantly.
How about you, Ray? Oh, sorry, Vince.
I think for me, it would be patience. Patience is a virtue. As painful as it may be to be patient, I think just putting your head down and getting through things and doing things, learning, just walking the road, with your own 2 feet, as opposed to asking other people to help you, it is far more rewarding and enlightening in the long run. So never be dissuaded by patience and the long road ahead.
All right, I agree. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I thought it was very interesting, really enjoyed it. And yeah, with that said, ladies and gentlemen, as always, make things your way. Good night.